Hello everybody. Today we will go over two formulas in Excel, count and COUNTIF. We will use those two formulas on this data set to do various types of counts. Now you can see that in this data set we have different types of columns. So we have columns that are text and there are columns that are numeric. So let's first start with counting in the numeric columns. So let's pick column M, for example. So now let's say my first task is to count how many numeric values are there in this column M. And that means cells in column M that have some numeric value in them and that are not blank, okay, or it doesn't contain text. So I can use the count formula for that. So I'm going to count that in this cell here, O2. So I will type equal sign, count, parentheses, and then there are two ways to do this. I can either just click on the column name here, M, and that selects the entire column. Or another more convenient way is to just click on this first cell, then hold the control and the shift key and then hit the down arrow, and that just selects the entire range of that column. So here I hit enter and I get 980. So that's the count for column M. Now you will notice if I try to use count on a column that has text values in it, so let's say sales channel. If I click here and I hit enter, so notice that it did not count. The count gave me the value of 0. And that's because count formula counts numeric values. It does not count text values. So in a little bit, we'll see how we can use COUNTIF to do that count. One important thing to remember about the count formula is that it does not count cells that are blank. So suppose I delete one of these values here in column M. If I delete, let's say, this cell, notice that the count changes from 980 to 979. And that's because count will only count cells that have some numeric value in them. Let's now put the value back in this cell so that the count goes back up to 980. Now suppose I want to do another count, but this time I only want to count values that are greater than some certain threshold. So suppose I want to count values that are over 100,000 in column M. Okay, so we can use the COUNTIF formula there. So in cell O3, I will type this formula. So let's say I want to do a COUNTIF in column M where the value is greater than 100,000. So the way to do that is to put double quotes, greater than sign, then type 100,000 and double quotes again. So we're providing an input of a string to COUNTIF formula, and we're saying count the cells in column M if the cells are greater than 100,000. Okay, and then I will close the parentheses and then I will hit enter. And we get the value of 729. So there are 729 cells that have values of greater than 100,000. Now again, if I were to delete one of these cells here, you can see even COUNTIF does not count blank cells. Let's now put this value back here. So this counts now go back up to 980 and 729. So let's now count using one of the date columns. So let's say that I want to do a count on ship date column here. And we want to count rows of data where ship date is less than or equal to December 31st, 2015. Okay, so we want to do that count. And COUNTIF formula can be used to do that count on columns that contain dates. So I will do that count here in cell O5. So we will type COUNTIF. We will click column G, and in double quotes I will type less than or equal to 12/31/2015. Double quotes, parentheses, and then enter, and we get 761. So there's 761 rows of data where the ship date is less than or equal to 12/31/2015. So again, COUNTIF can count columns that contain date. All right, so now let's use one of these formulas on columns that contain text values. So remember, we tried to do that using count, but it did not work because count only counts numeric values. So it can count numeric values in a range. It will not count text values in a range. So we want to now count in column D how many cells are there that have text populated in them. So the way to do that is we can again use COUNTIF, click on column D, and this time in double quotes I will type the asterisk sign. Okay, and there you go. So now it's counting text. Now COUNTIF, we know that it takes an input here, right? And the input asterisk basically means count all text. Now if it contains, let's say one of the cells contains a value, then you can see that COUNTIF will not count that value, right? Because the count dropped. And you will also notice it says 981. That's because it's counting the header here as well, which is text. Okay. Now, what if I want to do count again on this column, but this time I only want to count how many cells are there that have the word online. Okay, so I don't want to count offline, cells that have offline in them. So how can I do that? Again, I will type equal COUNTIF. I will again select this column, and this time I will just type in double quotes online. And this will, what this will do is this is an input into the COUNTIF formula to count cells that have text online in them. And we get 498. So similarly, I can count offline. Now what's important in this formula is if I do a COUNTIF on this cell, and suppose this time I write online in caps, right? Now notice it's actually counting even if I provided an input where the text is capitalized. Now lastly, where I found COUNTIF to be very useful is suppose now we want to do counts based on different thresholds. So suppose I create a table here where I specify the threshold, and suppose the threshold is, or the thresholds are greater than 1 million. Then let's say we have less than or equal to 1 million. Then less than or equal to 500,000. Less than or equal to 100,000. And less than or equal to 50,000. Okay, so we have these different thresholds. Now what I can do is I can do a count here based on these thresholds. And the way I will do that, and suppose I want to do that count again on column M, is I'll say COUNTIF, click on the cell M, and then comma, and then for the criteria, we can simply just click here. And that gives us the count based on the input here, which I specified as greater than 1 million. So there are 80 records where cells in column M where the value is more than 1 million, right? Now, to do the counts for all of these other different thresholds, I don't need to type them. I can simply just drag this like that. Okay, so again, the way I did that is when you have this cell selected, just hover over the lower right corner until you see this plus sign, and then click and just drag it down like that. You can also do a trick here, hover over this lower right and simply just double click, and that copies the formula down. So now there are 900 records less than or equal to 1 million, 661 less than or equal to 500,000, 251 that are less than or equal to 100,000, and there are 166 records that are less than or equal to 50,000. So this is how you can use count and COUNTIF formulas in Excel to do different counts. And as you can see, COUNTIF is actually very useful in doing different types of counts on different types of columns.